Hej Christian. Velkommen alle sammen, welcome everyone. Er alle ok med, at vi taler engelsk? Er der nogen, der har problemer med det? English seems to be okay. Because, many do not understand English. Yeah, you have to come a little closer, but it's not so bad today. Sometimes they want to say in the corners. So, today I'll read from Srimad Bhagavad Gita's second chapter, text number 20. Try to say a few words on that. 22. Ja. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So here, Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, which is called Contents of the Gita Summarized, and it's text number 20, and the Sanskrit goes Na jayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita va nabhuya ajo nita shasvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamana sarire. Translation: for the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existent, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. Purport: qualitatively, the small atomic fragmental part of the Supreme Spirit is one with the Supreme. He undergoes no changes like the body. Sometimes the soul is called the steady or kutastha. The body is subject to 6 kinds of transformations. It takes its birth from the womb of the mother's body, remains for some time, grows, produces some effects, gradually dwindles, and at last vanishes into oblivion. The soul, however, does not go through such changes. The soul is not born, but because it takes on a material body, the body takes its birth. The soul does not take birth there, and the soul does not die. Anything which has birth also has death. And because the soul has no birth, he therefore has no past, present, or future. He is eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. That is, there is no trace in history of his coming into being. Under the impression of the body, we seek the history of birth, etc., of the soul. The soul does not at any time become old as the body does. The so-called old man, therefore, feels himself to be in the same spirit as in his childhood or youth. The changes of the body do not affect the soul. The soul does not deteriorate like a tree, nor anything material. The soul has no byproduct either. The byproducts of the body, namely children, are also different individual souls, and owing to the body, they appear as children of a particular man. The body develops because of the soul's presence, but the soul has neither offshoots nor change. Therefore, the soul is free from the 6 changes of the body. In the Katha Upanishad 1-18, we also find a similar passage which reads Nadyayate mriyate va vipashtin nayam kutashtin navahu va kashtit ajo nita sasvato yam purano hanyate hanyamane savire. The meaning and purport of this verse is the same as in the Bhagavad Gita, but here in this verse there's one special word, vipashtit, which means learned or with knowledge. The soul is full of knowledge, or full always with consciousness. Therefore consciousness is a symptom of the soul. Even if one does not find the soul within the heart where he is situated, one can still understand the presence of the soul simply by the presence of consciousness. Sometimes we do not find the sun in the sky owing to clouds or for some other reason, but The light of the sun is always there, and we are convinced that it's there for daytime. As soon as there's little light in the sky early in the morning, we can understand that the sun is in the sky. Similarly, since there is some consciousness in all bodies, whether man or animal, we can understand the presence of the soul. This consciousness of the soul is, however, different from the consciousness of the Supreme, because the Supreme Consciousness is all knowledge, past, present, and future. The consciousness of the individual soul is prone to be forgetful. When he is forgetful of his real nature, he obtains education and enlightenment from the superior lessons of Krishna. But Krishna is not like the forgetful soul. If so, Krishna's teachings of Bhagavad Gita would be useless. There are two kinds of souls, namely the minute particle soul, Anu, Atma, and the super soul, Vibhu, Atma. This is also confirmed in the Katha Upanishad 1-20 in this way. Ano aniyan mahato mahiyan atmasya janto nito guhayam tam akratu pashati vitashoko tatu prasadan mahimana atmanaham. Both the super soul, Paramatma, and the atomic soul, Jivatma, are situated on the same tree of the body, within the same heart of the living being, and only one who has become free from all material desires as well as limitations can, by the grace of the Supreme, understand the glories of the soul. Krishna is a fountainhead of the super soul also, as it will be disclosed in the following chapters, and Arjuna is the atomic soul forgetful of his real nature. Therefore he requires to be enlightened by Krishna or by his bona fide representative, the spiritual master. So here we are in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, which starts out with, you might say, a crash course in self-realization. This is the first point in spiritual life, is to understand the self, who we are. We should know ourselves. And Krishna immediately explains that the self is not the body. And he gives into great details, something like 17, 18 texts, verses of the right here Bhagavad Gita in the beginning, are simply devoted to this point, that the soul is eternal and non-material, and is different from the body. And the body's nature, the soul's nature, are being contrasted to each other verse after verse, where it's said the soul is unchanging, eternal the same, never had birth, never has death, and the body is perishable, has a beginning, has an end, goes through changes. The body undergoes 6 kinds of changes. It takes its birth, it grows, it remains for some time, it produces byproducts, it gradually dwindles and it disappears. That's the body. The soul is different. It's not that nature. And it can be understood it's like that, because even though the body is changing, one feels always to be the same me, the same I. So I must be different from the body. I mean, it's only 2 different natures. And Krishna is repeating this point again and again and again, because it's important. It's a basis of all spiritual understanding. If one doesn't understand this point, one has no basis for practicing spiritual life. Then spiritual life or religion will be merely ritualistic or just traditional. Many people are religious because they were born into a particular religion and are just following it because we've always been following in our country, in our family, or because one has a nice feeling, one has a God must be there, or there must be more to life than just matter, or there must be a purpose. There's some good or some right feeling, but not really any deep realization. It all starts from this basic point, and that's why Krishna is repeating it. It's been things important things. This is a system in the Vedic literature that if something is important, it's been repeated. Just like you might also have to have a child, and just to emphasize to the child, it's important to say you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. So similar here, things are being repeated to emphasize this is so important. This is the foundation for everything else. We are spiritual beings. Therefore, there is a spiritual life. Actually, real life is spiritual. Materialistic life is an illusion. There is no. Matter is not alive. Matter appears to be alive because there is spirit within matter, but that's only, it's only an appearance. And as soon as the spirit has left matter, matter is completely dead and lifeless. That is seen when somebody dies. Body is there, same body as was there before, but completely without life because the person, the spirit, has left. So when one discovers that point, that I'm spirit, then one can start practicing spiritual life and cultivating spiritual understanding. And here in this verse here, again here more is said about the soul or the self. Somewhat again repeated. It says here, there's no birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, he does not come into being, and he will not come into being. In other words, it's not that the soul, at one point, you might say many lifetimes ago, the soul was created. That's not the fact. The soul, we are not created by God. Some would say the soul is created by God. The soul is not created by God. The soul is an eternal fragment of God. God is eternal. The soul is as eternal as God. It's an eternal fragment, but it's not created at any point. Some philosophies, I think some Christians have the idea that the soul is created, and once it's created, then after that it is eternal. But that's not a fact. Or even one in another edition, or by a previous edition of Bhagavad Gita, it was formulated that the soul, once have come into being, does not cease to be. And this is wrong. The correct translation is, as says here in the Sanskrit, says here, what is it? Na means never this. Bhutva, having come into being, Bhavita, will come to be, or Bhuya, is again coming to be. That means the word is Bhuya or Bhava. It's Sanskrit, and it's in different what's called tenses, different tense. Is that set? The grammar? Anyways, it's in past tense, in present tense, and in future tense in the Sanskrit here. It says the soul in the past did not come into being. The soul at present is not coming into being, and the soul in the future will not come into being. And so it says he does not come into being, he did not come into being, he does not come into being, he will not come into being. That's a self. In other words, it has, we have always existed. The soul is eternal, and there's no point in time when the soul did not exist. Neither will there be any point in time when we do not exist. This is the Vedic philosophy. This is the correct Vedic philosophy understanding of the soul. So that's it. Actually, it's a deep philosophical point, incredible to meditate on. I mean, it's, in one sense, very straightforward, still inconceivable. it's inconceivable. Eternity, that we have eternally existed or will eternally exist, and that God is as similar eternal. It's inconceivable. Nevertheless, it is a fact, and it can be perceived because we can perceive ourselves. We can perceive ourselves that we are unchangingly the same, from moment to moment, day to day, year after year, over a full lifetime. I can see I'm completely the same I always have been. Of course I might change the mind is always flickering, and some make the mistake of thinking the mind is a self, but that's not what Bhakti says. The mind is a different thing. The mind is consisting of thoughts and feelings and desires. So they, of course, are always flickering, or they're like waves. So sometimes I see when we bring up this point that the self is unchanging. No, I've changed. I've changed since I was, I've become mature, or I've become this or that. I've changed. No, that's not you. That's the mind. The mind has developed, and we can see that actually. It's mind is always. It's not over many years. It changes, from moment to moment, or within a day. One has the mind is so. We have experienced all kinds of mental states during the day. Happiness and sadness, or just thoughtfulness, or we get bored, or sometimes we get angry, that can come very suddenly. So it's a complete different mental state, but it's the same person, he's just angry. And then afterwards he cools down, hopefully. Still it's the same person all the time. So it takes a little meditation to start with. But one can understand actually, yes, the self is the person they are observing, the conscious person observing all the time. That is the unchanging I, the constant observer within the body, and that is the first step in self-realization. As I said, it's inconceivable, but we can still perceive it. We can say, but how can you understand something that is inconceivable? We cannot understand something that's inconceivable, but we can understand it is there because I'm here. As soon we might sometimes bring up the point of God's existence, and someone simply cannot grasp it, or how can there be a being, so an all-pervading being such as God? That's completely, I cannot conceive even of such a thing. But one just has to then turn around and meditate on oneself, and one will find I am also inconceivable. It's an inconceivable fact that I am. It's the most inconceivable fact that I am existing from moment to moment. It doesn't make sense that I'm existing. Whenever I think about it, I'm completely surprised that I'm existing. But it's a fact. I cannot deny it. I do exist. And that means, and it's a surprising, it's inconceivable, but I do exist. I have to, I realize inconceivable things do exist, namely myself. So it's not, in one sense, more inconceivable that God might exist, or that all of you exist. It's inconceivable that I exist. It's even more amazing that all of you also exist as individual beings. But you do. You're obviously not a product of my imagination or illusion. One could of course think like that, but you're not, because you're not behaving like I want you to behave. You have your own minds, your own will, and if you were just a product of my imagination, I could control you, and you would just dance and serve me as I would like. But you don't, and you shouldn't either. You have each of us, we can observe, have our own individuality. Of course, we all are individuals. So that's amazing. We can observe that. That God exists. That's in one sense. That's not more inconceivable or amazing. It is amazing, but we have had to accept amazing facts, namely our own existence. And the thing is, God's existence is very easy to deduce from the observation of oneself. And this is what this last part of this verse here talks about, that there are that self-realization means to understand the tiny self, namely us. That's also a point to remember, we are tiny. Sometimes we might think that, we are I am the great soul, the all-pervading soul. Just right now I'm just covered, I've forgotten it. But when I become realized and when I become liberated, then actually I realize that actually I have no limitations. I'm God. I'm everything. That's of course a contradictory in terms, because if I really was the greatest and all-pervading, how can I be covered now by forgetfulness? That means forgetfulness is an energy that is more powerful than me. That means I cannot be the greatest. And we can understand that we just tiny. I can take questions last 5 minutes before. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I hope you can remember the question. And we just tiny, and it's obvious when we look at how great the cosmos is, how great the planet is, or just how many people are there, and how we just one out of presently 7 billion people on this planet, and the humans is just a tiny fraction out of all the living beings that are there, plants, animals, and so on. Actually, one becomes even a little dizzy to think of how tiny we actually are. We just tiny souls. This is how we tiny souls. So that's self-realizing means understanding, first of all, the tiny souls, the tiny soul, ourselves, but then also the great soul. Because logic immediately follows there must be a great soul also, because we are part of a greater whole. Since we are just small, tiny parts, what does a part mean? It means there's a whole. And so what is a whole? The whole is, the whole has the nature that is found in the parts. At least, it also has, the whole of course also has many more qualities, but at least the qualities that are found in the small parts must be there also in the great whole. Just like a ray of sun is light and heat. So we can immediately conclude that the sun is full of light and heat. How can the ray of sun have light and heat if the sun doesn't have light and heat? So similarly, since we as tiny parts are tiny, we have consciousness, we are persons, we are conscious persons. So the complete whole must also have consciousness and be a person. It's very easy to deduce existence of God's existence from just understanding this simple point, that I am eternal being. And so real self-realization, as per the Bhagavad Gita's way, the Vedic way, is to realize the tiny soul and the great soul, the Paramatma, the super soul, simultaneously. This is what actually Krishna consciousness means. Krishna is the name of the super soul, God, and he's speaking here. So it's just like when it's daylight, one sees the sun and one sees oneself at the same time. When it's dark, one can not even see oneself. As soon as the sun rises, one sees the sun, one sees oneself, and one in the daytime is conscious both of the sun and oneself simultaneously, and everything else. So actual self-realization means to realize constantly the myself and the super self, Krishna, God, who is all-pervading, who is present everywhere. That is the nature of the great soul, present everywhere. Outside everything also, as a source of everything, but all-pervading, just like our consciousness, our present consciousness, pervades this particular body. And I am conscious of all parts of this body. As soon as there's some feeling, some pain, some pleasure in one part of the body, immediately I'm conscious of it. Of course, I'm not conscious of what goes on in any of your bodies. Only each of you is conscious of your particular body. But that's the nature of what individual soul. His consciousness is pervading his entire body, and that's it. The nature of the super soul is his consciousness is pervading everything, and he's conscious of everything. In the Upanishad, it's expressed that he has his ears and eyes everywhere, but he's conscious of everything. He's so conscious also of what goes on in my body, and he's conscious of what goes on in all bodies. He's outside the universe, conscious of the universe. He's inside the universe. He's even inside the atom, and conscious of what goes on inside the atom. That's the nature of the super soul, and he's there, and one can logically understand his existence